Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I know we've got some more chairs coming through, so we're going to bring those to you. If you do not have a chair, if you have an open chair next to you, raise your hand. Otherwise, we will go ahead and get started. I know we've also got some folks on Zoom joining us, so if y'all have questions, put them in the chat. But this is our first session to kick off the application cycle for students that are hoping to enter medical or dental school in the fall of 2026, which I know seems far away, but it is not. And so that is why we are hosting this session. As Dale mentioned earlier, our plan is to host this as an interactive session. So we're going to split some time between the information we're sharing here on the screen and give y'all time to work through the prompts from us. And so if you haven't done so already, sign in for us using the QR code on the screen. And if you've got your laptops, it looks like most of you do, download the handout at that tiny URL right there. And that is what we're going to be working on here this evening. And so during those reflection periods, our team of advisors are going to be cycling through. So if you have questions, we'll try and get those answered. And we'll also try and save some time at the end to answer your questions as well. The session is going to be recorded, and so while we are here to answer, we'll post things on our website by the end of the week so that you can watch this again and again as you evaluate your readiness to apply. All right, so let me get started right here. My name is Christine Martinez. I'm the Executive Director of Academic Advising here at Rice. I've been at Rice for about 12 years now. And we have an amazing team of advisors and support staff that are here to help you as you start this application journey. So if I'll let folks just quickly introduce themselves from where they are to you. Thank you. That was Tia, our Associate Director, and then Dale.
Thomas, I'm liaison point for Will Rice. You want Candidacy advising? I've been at Rice for 6 years, been in the OEA for 2.5 and a bit.
Wonderful. That was Dale. She's one of our assistant directors, and Nicole. That was Nicole. She's been here for a year. And Valentina. Awesome. Thanks, Valentina. And we also have 2 support staff. Actually, we have some additional advisors who are not here. They're going to run our session in the next for Open File 101, but Marcos Canales as well as Amanda O'Wire. And so Marcos, for those of you that are applying the dental route, he is going to be the person you're going to be working with. He works with a couple of pre-meds, but he's our pre-dent guru in the office. Our presentation, I'll be honest, is skewed towards pre-med, just largely because those are the numbers that we have here. Most of the content is going to apply to both groups, but Marcos will be the one to tell you if there are any notable differences. We do have 2 support staff. Alexis is our department coordinator, and Sophia is our health professions coordinator, who really is heavily involved in a lot of the administrative pieces of Open File. So a lot of you will be interacting with her via email and during the process. Excuse me. So again, if you have not already done so, download the handout. The QR code on this screen is also a link to the handout as well. But what are we planning to do here with you all this evening? This is the purpose of our session. And so this is really a good time for all of you to reflect on where you are as a candidate, because you still have about 8 to 9 months before applications open up. And so while we can't predict, right, who is going to get in, we can use what we've seen, what we know about our applicants to really help you evaluate your preparation in all of the different areas that we'll go through. And so that's our goal for this evening. You may decide today or down the line that you would rather have some additional time to prepare, right, to be a competitive applicant, and that is totally fine. We'll talk more about gap years at the end of this presentation. But in all cases, our hope are the questions that we ask you tonight will help you identify your strengths and that you can highlight in your application, as well as identify some areas of improvement that you can work on in the next couple of months here before you apply whenever that may be. So hopefully this pyramid isn't new to you. This is what we call our pyramid or our strong applicant that really lays out all of the components to be a strong candidate for medical and dental school. And so the plan tonight is we're going to work through all of those layers with you guys and give you some guidelines as you assess yourself. So a lot of reflection is going to go on tonight. Again, download the handout if you haven't already. We're going to give you breaks as we read through these pieces so you have some time to jot down notes and fill things out. So as you download, just remember, right, that the acceptance to medical and dental school is not based on numbers alone, that it is a holistic evaluation of your application. So that includes, yes, your academics, but your co-curriculars, your motivation, your capacity for teamwork and leadership, your communication skills, where you are, where your state of residency is, that can also play a pretty big part, the letters of recommendation that you solicit from faculty and others, and ultimately the impression that you leave on admissions committees through your application and through your interview. And so again, we're going to dive deep into all of those areas tonight, but also be aware that there will always be some unquantifiable or even unpredictable factors that could impact your application. But I'm going to pass it on over to Dale, who will start us on this pyramid here.
Having said all that about holistic admissions, we're going to start with probably the most quantifiable aspect of your application, which is your academics. As I'm sure you are aware, successful med school applicants and dental school applicants do need to have a strong academic foundation, which includes both your grades and your test scores. So we're going to look at some specifics about that first. When you submit a transcript to any of the central application services, that would be AMCAS for many of the schools across the country, most of the MD schools across the country, or TMD-SAS for the Texas schools, AAD-SAS for dental schools, or ACOMAS for DO schools. They will calculate several different GPAs based on your grades. There are small distinctions between the way they do it and what different schools want to see. But there are two important metrics in all the systems, and those are your science GPA and your cumulative GPA. Science GPA is also sometimes called your VCPM GPA because it basically is meant to count biology, chemistry, physics, and math. You may be unsure about how some of your classes, such as KIND classes or CMOR classes, whether they're going to fall under that science GPA or your any other GPA. We do have a link there on the handout to AMCAS's course classification guide that can give you some more help with that. We still can't promise exactly how things are going to count, but it can be enough to give you a pretty good idea. Note that you also, when you submit a transcript, you'll classify your courses accordingly, and they will go back and validate that, but you're going to have a chance to make a case for what you think it should count as. So this is for reference. These are some stats for Rice students who were accepted into medical school and matriculated a year ago. So a very recent set of, again, successful Rice applicants. So the average science GPA for those students is 3.74. As you think about that, do remember that means that roughly half of the accepted students had a science GPA that was below 3.74. 10th percentile, so 10% of the accepted students had a score below 3.39 and 10% up there above 3.98. As far as cumulative GPAs, that would be, again, all the coursework, including the science stuff and everything else, the numbers are a little bit higher typically, and you'll see there that the average cumulative GPA for the same group is 3.83, with the 10th percentile 3.6, 90th still there at 3.98. Another aspect, of course, is your test scores. Test scores are also really important. We're going to focus here on the MCAT because, again, like Christine said, we have a lot more data on pre-med and MCAT scores than we do on the DAT data. So it's just a little less informative because it's a smaller sample size. So again, looking at that same group, Rice's accepted applicants who entered med school last fall, the average MCAT score was 517. But 10% of those students scored below 510, and 10% above 523. The national average, though, for accepted students is 512. So we do encourage you not to, and again, that's just an average. So we do encourage you not to focus too narrowly on how you compare only to your Rice peers, and also to keep in mind the broader applicant pool. Often applicants can get hung up on medians and averages, so we're not showing you that to make you fixate on that more. Really, you're also trying to highlight that we have a good spread of scores and GPA and so on from admitted applicants across all kinds of GPA and MCAT ranges. So we don't want you to feel like you have to be at the very top of that. Now, as you think about your own academic foundation, your metrics are undeniably a part of the picture. You may find it useful to look at AMCAS's nationwide data for students who applied and were accepted. And there's a link to that grid. It's a big grid with MCAT scores and GPAs, and it's up at the top of the first reflection sheet. You can see a link to that, and you'll have time to pour over that in a moment if you would like. Now, there's also more to your academic profile than just the numbers, though. So you need to also think about questions like, perhaps an obvious but really central one, have you taken all the classes that are required by the schools that you plan to apply to? Do you have a substantial number of science courses on your transcript, ideally taken at Rice for letter grades that show them in your transcript? Have you challenged yourself by taking rigorous classes, or does it look like you've shied away from those? So those are some of the questions to ask yourself as you think about your transcript and how it's going to look when the med schools look at that. If you haven't taken the MCAT or the DAT yet, or if you're unhappy with the score you received, you need to have a plan for when you're going to take it, or if you're going to retake it, and when and how you're going to prepare for that. You also eventually need to think about how your metrics are going to match up with the schools that interest you. Or you may prefer to work from a starting point of your scores and then see which schools fit those. A really useful tool is the MSAR, that's the Medical School Admissions Requirements tool. And there's a link to that also on the reflection sheet. Some of the data is behind a paywall, and you can either buy a subscription for a year, or you can get an access code from the OAA that for a week at a time that'll allow you to look at all that information. So nobody should feel like they can't access that. So in just a minute, we're going to do a first of our little workshop times, I guess, where we're going to give you a little break to think about, in this case, your academics. So during that time, what we're going to ask you to do is to look at that first page of your handout and read the statements and sort of think about where you stand in these areas. Obviously, there are check boxes that we've also put space for you to comment or list or reflect. We understand you also probably don't have time right now to do all the calculations and research and check every one of your classes on the course classification list and so on, but you can start making some notes. If, when you do that, you feel that academic foundation is an area of relative weakness for you, don't despair. There are things you can do to improve your case. And that's part of why we're having this session now instead of when it's time to apply. So these are some suggestions that you might consider to help you bolster your academic foundation. So during these reflection minutes, we want to make a note of any of these that you might need to consider. Do you need to think, maybe I should have had, an upper level bios class next semester, or things like that. So we're going to, or maybe I should think about retaking the test, or when do I want to do it? All those kinds of questions. So we're going to give you just a few minutes, but again, please take this time to think, to jot notes on that first page. We're just sticking right now with that academic foundation page. If you have time, maybe pull up some of those websites that you can explore later. And during this time, we're just going to take a few minutes, especially on this one, but we'll be circulating. So if you have any questions, please raise your hand. We'd be happy to come to your tables, talk to you about what you're seeing and thinking. And again, we'll have these up here as things for you to consider.
Okay, so the next layer of the pyramid that we're going to talk about is your healthcare experience. So to make a strong candidate for your healthcare experience, this is where you're talking about the activities where you're observing or participating in some type of patient care. These are a few examples of ways that you can have healthcare experience. So as you can see, healthcare experience can cover a fairly wide range of things. For shadowing, you can shadow physicians. This is how you gain understanding of a doctor or dentist's day-to-day responsibilities. usually for providing patient care experience. This is often known as your clinical experience, as you guys may know. And so a few examples are on the side: REMS or EMT services here at Rice, medical assistant, crisis helpline, and then Alzheimer's game leader are a few examples. Sometimes, but not always, some of these may require some type of certifications. So make sure that you look into those opportunities as well. They may be done as volunteering or paid services, full-time or part-time. And then as well, serving in clinical settings, this is your volunteer experiences. So this is another form of healthcare experience. This one is often where you're shadowing doctors and patient interactions. Usually as well, you can learn about the hospital logistics and teamwork and the different types of teamwork within the nurses and the doctors and the staff there. To count this as a clinical experience, clearly describe these activities related to direct patient interactions. So make sure that you are helping and assisting with patients and not just holding towels or folding bed sheets or things like that. Activities may be categorized as clinical or community service, depends on the specific task that you are doing. And then as well, it's okay if you don't have extensive experience in any of these areas. Okay, so now we're going to move on to assessing yourself in this aspect. Avoid focusing on how much do I need or how many hours do I typically need from these experiences. These are just a few things that you can go in depth about to understand how you are best suited with this aspect. Prioritize your quality experiences over the quantity. So don't feel like you have to just continue to do a whole bunch of different things. Make sure that you're sticking with the things that are important to you and what makes you a candidate. Reflect on your healthcare experience and consider if you can elaborate and answer these questions, typically in an interview or maybe on your applications. Just to highlight a few, we add sustained interest. Is this something that you've worked consistently with over time compared to just something that you rushed at the end when you're about to apply because you feel like you needed more on your application? Can you talk about or write about specific experiences or details with assisting and helping in these aspects? And then your awareness of the needs of certain communities is also important in this aspect, because this is something that if you see the need for maybe the type of community that you want to work in, it's very popular to kind of talk about that in your interviews or in your applications as well. The last question may be the most general, but also important. How will these things that you've done impact your future as a medical student and ultimately as a doctor or dentist? So that's something that you really need to be able to think about and be able to explain when you are writing your primaries in your applications. Okay, so now for a few minutes to read through page 2 of your handout and see which one of these statements can you confidently make. We understand not a simple black and white statement, so you can use the check boxes, but then use the reflection space off to the side as well to start making notes about your experiences. So for future steps, if you feel like maybe you haven't done enough in that aspect, here are a few things that you can do to broaden your experiences. If this is an area where you see gaps or feel you may come up short, these are some steps that you can consider to strengthen your candidacy. Take a look at these, make notes of what you might want to do or how you can go about getting more healthcare experiences. So we are going to give you guys a few minutes to do that, and we're also going to walk around as well.
Okay, I hate to interrupt the clearly good discussions that we're all having. But can I get everyone's attention, please? I know we're having really good conversations with each other, asking our questions of advisors, so I'm glad you're using the time, but we want to be respectful. I was like, oh, some music going. We want to be respectful of your time, and so this is a lot of things to cover in this session, so we're going to keep moving. So next, we're gonna be talking about community service. And this is gonna be community service, volunteering, giving back in any area that's not happening in a medical healthcare setting. There always is some overlap because, you know, you can be volunteering in a hospital setting. So these aren't neat, completely separate categories. There is sometimes an overlay on this Venn diagram, but we're going to be focusing now on the community service aspect. So why is it important to have community service? Can't science and your GPA and all of that be enough? Well, med schools are looking for good doctors, not just good students, right? So they want med schools and dental schools are looking for students that can demonstrate altruism and a commitment to helping others. So you are doctors, dentists, it's a helping profession. You're serving other people and you're entering a very highly demanding career dedicated to serving others. And so schools want to see what you've been doing along the way that supports this and demonstrates that this isn't just, you know, talk for you, right? You're living out these actions and these values that you're citing when you're applying. So when it comes to community service, there is no right or wrong. There's no activity that you should do. There's not something that med schools are looking for. They're looking for you to have a genuine interest in the organizations that you're volunteering with, the causes that you're supporting. You know, again, like I said, there can be some overlap where you might be doing community service in a healthcare setting. But you can also do things that are completely unhealthcare, unmedical related, nothing to do with medicine at all. And that's still very valuable. You're still building a lot of skills and demonstrating these core competencies like altruism, commitment to others, cultural awareness, cultural humility, etc. So again, I like to say, you know, thinking about what you actually really enjoy doing yourself, you know, maybe when you were, before you came to Rice, you loved robotics and you are really into that. And so you now teach or volunteer with high school students, teaching them how to do robotics. Again, that doesn't feel medically related for you, but if you think about the skills that you're building, that's actually very relevant to your med school applications. These are just a couple of the organizations that a lot of our Rice students that we see participating in. So PAIR, which works with refugee populations in Houston, the Houston Food Bank. A lot of you will do volunteer work through your residential colleges. That's really great, really valuable. Center for Civic Leadership, they can help connect you with opportunities, as well as some of the sort of medium or long-term things too, you know, a alternative spring break, those types of projects. It's really important with community service that you are demonstrating a good depth and not just a breadth. We don't want you to be doing 100 different scattered projects where you're only doing one thing for half a day. We want to see a commitment to these organizations. We want to see you growing, you know, alongside these organizations over the course of a semester or a year or more. So when we think about assessing yourself in this area, you know, obviously here are some of the questions that you want to be thinking about. And so it's not just, can you say, yes, I care about other people, but it's, can you demonstrate it? Can you show these qualities through your activities? Can you reflect on them? Can you talk about them? Have you grown into leadership within these roles? So we do talk about leadership. It's not necessarily a separate category that we're going to assess separately. It kind of will often get bundled into community service. So again, leadership shows a lot of other great qualities, like people trust you, people will look up to you, they can rely on you, depend on you, you can problem solve, leading others within a team, respectful dialogue, etc. So again, so this last question here is an important one. Do some of your service commitments reflect your reasons for pursuing medicine? A lot of times we'll hear the joke, right, that the sort of most basic answer to why you want to go and be a doctor is you want to help people. Well, we want you to tease that out a little bit more, but then also, what have you been doing that shows that this is how you want to help people? What's informing this decision, and also what's, you know, supporting your evidence? So we're going to, again, do another reflection time going through this next page on the worksheet. Again, as always, there's check boxes, but also open reflection space. And if again, you kind of get to the end of this and you're like, you know what, this is an area of growth for me. I need to do a little bit more to demonstrate these qualities. So thinking about, you know, what kind of things you might be able to do. So part of that might be finding out what you really care about through skills inventories or causes that are like personal to you. That's a really good place to start. Looking not just on campus, but you can also look off campus as well. And then again, thinking about those skills that you build during these activities. So again, take some time to reflect, talk with the people at your table. We'll circle around to answer questions that you might have. And then we'll come back again for the next section.
All right, we can just go ahead and keep it rolling since it's almost 7. I know a lot of you guys have to leave. So I'm just gonna go ahead and move on to the next section. And that's talking about research. So when we talk about research, it's not as fundamental to med school candidacy as the other areas that we've already talked about. Unless you're applying to like an MD or a PhD program, research doesn't necessarily need to be fundamental to your application. Although most Rice students do research, so it can be impactful to your application if you choose to go that route. Really, what we are looking for when we're talking about research is how does it help to kind of articulate why you want to pursue your medical career, right? It's likely to be important for you for medical school if it's a medical school that is connected to like a very prestigious research facility. So, you know, school choice is also a factor when we're talking about research. Really, some reminders and guidelines about research. We really want you to know that it doesn't have to be a classic wet lab per se. Skills are generally transferable and can be honed in different environments of study. Presentation, publications can be admirable credentials for you to have as well. And that's great for you to highlight if you have them. If you don't, it's not a huge deal. Again, research is something that you should be passionate about. So when schools are looking at research as an on your application, they're really looking for consistency. You can try at least 2 semesters of research to see if this is something that you really want to do and want to continue. If it's not something that you want to continue, then feel free to just kind of move forward and put your energy and efforts in other areas. But once you do the research, if it is something you're passionate about, schools like to see a good 2 years of it sometimes on your application. But again, you can try for a semester or 2, and if it's not for you, then you can absolutely speak to that in your interview. Tell them how you tried it and you decided that this other area was something that you wanted to be more focused on or more passionate about. When we're talking about research, we're talking about how to kind of assess yourself in this area. So some questions to consider as you assess your research history are listed here. You may also want to make notes about impactful experiences you had while doing your research. You can look again at the core competencies list, think about what skills you've developed through doing your research as well. So have you developed a good understanding of the process? Have you been engaged for at least 2 semesters of research? Can you talk and write about how your research experience has contributed to your future as a medical practitioner or student? And have you developed positive relationships with PIs who might have to write letters of recommendation on your behalf? If you have a really good research experience, your PI is definitely somebody you want to tap to write your letter of recommendation because they can really speak to your growth as a researcher and how you kind of come across in the lab, which will be great as well. So future steps. If research is an area where you're not as strong as you would like to be, here are some steps to consider. Additional semesters of research are possible. Of course, here at Rice, we have Ori, you have your faculty members, definitely reach out to them if that's something that you're interested in. Undertake full-time research in the summer or maybe even during a gap year and cultivate positive personal relationships with those PIs and really work toward presentations and publications.
So what I'm focusing on is the top of the pyramid, right? Your personal attributes, and really it's how you present yourself in the application process. And while there are several elements that go into that, I'm really going to be focusing in on letters of recommendation. So letters of recommendation, also called letters of evaluation, right? So this is the way for med schools and dental schools to get an outside assessment of you, right? Of your suitability, of your readiness. And so if you participate in this open file process, which we will explain in detail at a later session, probably around November, you're going to receive a committee letter. And that serves as an overview of your candidacy by Rice, right? And so as part of that process, you will also need to secure individual letters of recommendation to accompany that committee letter. So let's kind of dive in here. So these are our recommendations. Most of our students are typically going to aim for 3 to 4. Usually, we will only recommend more for students that are going the MD PhD route or students that have taken gap years. And so they have some additional experience that they want addressed. And so some schools actually do have a hard limit on how many letters they're going to look at. So just be really mindful about who you are selecting for those letters. So what we do suggest here, professor in STEM, right? And that could overlap with your major, a professor in your major, or elsewhere. If you feel strongly about a professor in another area, like a minor, a foreign language, or your Swiss course even. But for some, that could potentially mean a second STEM professor. If you're conducting research, you want to get a letter of recommendation from them as well, or maybe someone related to clinical activities. And lastly, an individual who can talk about you and provide a strong character reference. And that could look a little bit different. An employer maybe, or somebody you worked with pretty closely in an organization that you're part of. And so the categories may overlap, but we do recommend that you get 2 professors, right, in any case. Some schools explicitly state that you do need 2 people who can speak to your ability in the sciences. And so each letter should add something of value about you. Don't add a 4th or a 5th letter just to have someone say you're a really excellent student, right? You want them to really dig deep and go deeper. And so individual letters do not need to give an overview of every single activity that you've done. They should really focus on the experience that they've had with you. So assessing yourself, again, a couple of questions that you want to think through. But as you think through, who you are going to ask for your letters of rec, we recommend letter writers who really observed you close up, right? That they can talk about you with a specificity. And so it's really important to have folks that know you really well and not really focus on somebody's title. You want them to be able to say something of substance about you. So in terms of future steps, this is the time, right? Think about, again, on that reflection sheet, make some notes about folks who you think you might want to ask. If you don't feel fully satisfied with that potential list, we want you to start working on that because it's really important. The other piece to remember is our faculty, they get so many requests for letters of recommendation. And so writing a thoughtful and a strong letter on your behalf, it takes time. So our office does recommend if you're moving into the 2026 cycle, think about asking your writers by January. I know that sounds really early because the apps are in this summer, but sometimes folks kind of hit a cap of how many students they want to support because it does take time for them to write up those letters for you. And so if you're unsure about someone, I think one of the big questions that we always tell you is, or what you should ask that person is, would you be comfortable writing a strong letter on my behalf? Not just any letter, but a strong letter. And I think that'll give you a good indication of whether or not that is a good person for you to select. So I think we're gonna keep on moving. So I'm passing it back to Gail here.
And we are getting close to wrapping up, obviously, I know hopefully you still will take some time to go back and fill out some more things in these reflections. We haven't had time to, pause in every case, but I hope you'll continue to use this reflection sheet. Also wanted to highlight the last couple of pages, or the next to last couple of pages, I guess, describe the AAMC's core competencies for admitted medical students, which Valentina mentioned. These are things that, again, are ways that you might use that can be a useful framework as you talk about the different activities and experiences you've had. And we've put under each one, aside from a little description, also a space where you can make notes of any of the activities where you think, oh, this related to that. So this is a really useful thing if you're thinking like, I was on the dance team, but what does that have to do with med school? Maybe that's about teamwork, or I was a socials chair. What would that do? Maybe that was about communication, things like that you can make notes so that you can see the value and then of course communicate that value when you talk to the schools. So again, we do hope that you will continue to work through the sheets, make use of the questions, reflect on it, and so on. We've given you a lot of information, a lot of things to think about, and there we go. You may be wondering where to go from here. I promise our wish is not just to sow doubt and insecurity. So returning to the goals that we set at the start of the hour, we really hope this has helped you begin to evaluate your candidacy, to see the areas of strength that you might want to highlight in your application, maybe to give you some strategies to address areas of relative weakness if you find those. Some of the steps we suggested are things that you still have time to put into place between now and May. And that's when you would be putting your application together, well, finalizing it really for the coming cycle. So there's still time for some of those things. Other things may take longer, and that's okay too if you decide to wait and do those. On that note, I want to share a little bit of data about gap years, just to show you how things have played out recently. So gap years are becoming more and more common. Of course, the application cycle itself takes about a year. So, to go straight into medical school, you do have to apply right at the end of your junior year. So if you wait again and apply at the end of senior year, you'd have one gap year, which you would have applied at the beginning of that year. About half of the applicants from Rice in the latest cycle had taken one or more gap years. And that is a continuation of a long-term trend towards taking gap years. Some medical schools report that as many as 2/3 of their students took gap years. So even though our numbers are going up, the national trend is even more in that direction. And this just goes back to the fact that if you don't feel like you're at your peak in May or, at the end of this year, there's nothing wrong with waiting a cycle or two to get yourself to where you want to be. Applying is time-consuming and arduous, and we want you to apply when you really feel like you're at your strongest. That does not mean you have to be absolutely stellar in every one of those areas and be able to answer every one of those questions affirmatively. You don't have to take every possible future step, something like that, before you apply. But you just want to apply again when you feel you're at your strongest. You want to weigh up how competitive you think you can be in this cycle, and then also how much could you realistically improve your candidacy given more time. Okay. Ultimately, you need to assess when you're ready to apply. We hope we've given you the tools tonight to kind of help you with that. Also, we do, want you to know that we are available, of course, to you to continue advising you and to meet with you one-on-one, but we do really ask that you take time to think about these questions and these tools. We ask that you please not come in next week and say, can you tell me all those things again? We would really like you to think about it, to reflect, to consider yourself what are the steps you want to take. The good news is we will open up the open file registration in November, so you have a good couple of months before anything else is happening on the the active front as far as applying on our end. That gives you some time again to think, to talk to your friends, or talk to your possible letter writers, to talk to your families, whatever it may be, again, and mostly just to reflect yourself, but also to talk with us. And then in November, again, we will launch the open file sign up. You'll have until January even to decide if you want to register to apply in the next year, and then it'll be actually.
I wanted to do something like that.
Oh, that's
Eventually.
So if for those of you who choose to do so. So I hope this has been helpful. I know it's only the start, and we look forward to working with you.
It just takes a long time.
Have you braided before? Wait, can you show me with it? I've never seen it braided.
Yeah.
We also do have a little time to linger for those of you who didn't get questions answered and wanted. We can be here for 1 and 2. We can be here for a little bit longer. Thank you so much for turning up in good numbers.